Welcome to Frank Buckley Interviews. Tonight my guest is a woman who became a hostage while she was shopping at her local Trader Joe's this past summer. And then she became instrumental in bringing about a peaceful end to the hostage drama. My guest is MaryLinda Moss.
Frank Buckley Interviews starts now.
A store manager was killed in the shootout that happened as the gunman was running inside the Silver Lake Trader Joe's. And MaryLinda Moss was determined to prevent any further violence. And that meant keeping the man with the gun who was holding everyone hostage as calm as possible.
Across the parking lot on the roof was a sharpshooter, and I could see it as if it was 10 feet away. So I stood up and started yelling into the phone and yelling to the guy across the street, "Get off the roof, get off the roof." Meanwhile, he's saying, if you don't get him off the roof, somebody's gonna get hurt. And then he's starting to count down. 5, 4, 3.
MaryLinda Moss on what happened inside that Trader Joe's store this past July when we come back. MaryLinda, thank you for joining me. You experienced something that most of us hope we will never experience. When a man rushed into a Trader Joe's in which you were shopping, ultimately held folks hostage. Sadly, one person was killed in a shootout, and you ended up negotiating with police or helping to negotiate a peaceful end to this. I'm going to ask you about all of that in a moment, but first I want to know more about you and where you found the courage and strength to step up to do what you did. So who is MaryLinda Moss, and what were you doing before that fateful day?
So I'm an artist, installation artist and sculptor. I also am an art consultant. So I work with interior designers procuring artwork for their clients. Mm-hmm. So I live in the art world. It's what makes me happy. I also have had experiences through my life that I think led to me. I actually think it's a combination of a whole bunch of things in my life that led me to be able to be present in the way I was that day. So I actually got sober when I was 18. Mm-hmm. And so as you can imagine, there were some challenges before then. But my entire adult life has been living each day, seeing who I can be, what I need to do to be more comfortable in my life, to be better able to be in the world. So I think all of that played into me being able to be really kind of grounded and present, not driven by fear in the moment. In the beginning, I was definitely very afraid. When we first heard the gunshots.
You're in the store shopping.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
As we all do in a Trader Joe's. And so the first sound that you heard, or the first indication that there was something wrong, was the sound of this automobile accident.
Right.
And then you hear gunshots immediately?
No, so then we heard sirens, and I remember thinking, wow, that was too fast. Like, how did they know there's an accident? Because it was so fast. And then probably around the same amount of time after, then we hear the gunshots. And I heard gunshots louder from within the store, or they were coming into the store, whatever it was louder.
And were you in the process of checking out when
Yes.
this happened?
Yeah. And so I'm laying down, and then there was somebody else laying down in front of me. There was a woman laying next to me, and the man in front of me was on the phone to his mother. I later got to know him well. It's Mike.
And are people screaming? Or
there are people screaming. There are people running. There are people saying, "Get down!" And then I'm looking at Mike across the way, and I see his shirt is getting saturated with blood, and there's blood dripping onto the floor. And that's when I look up and I saw the assailant, Gene Atkins, and he was bleeding profusely from a bullet wound in his arm.
And is he speaking? Is he?
So I hear things going on. He had asked one of the other shoppers to pour water on his wound. That same guy, I heard part of the conversation, said he had a 9 and a 4-year-old in the car. And so they ended up, Gene agreed for him to leave, but he got his phone. So that is the phone that the police ended up then calling, later on.
And you say that he wasn't frantic, he wasn't screaming at people, he wasn't waving his gun around. It wasn't that sort of an atmosphere.
It was not. It was clearly he's trying to figure out how to get out of this door. He wasn't threatening to anybody, he wasn't aggressive towards anybody, but he was also in a weakened state. So he was losing a lot of blood, he was weak. Eventually, he was going into shock. He was shivering, and and that led to another really, really difficult. Part of it was when I found Melly. He was shivering, and he asked if anybody had any a jacket. And
when you say Melly, you're talking about MaryLinda Corrado.
Yeah.
She is the
I'm sorry, the Trader Joe's employee who was
shot and killed. And so when you see her, is it clear she's gravely wounded?
So he saw down the at the manager's counter, where the manager's counter used to be. Behind there was a closet there, and you could see jackets hanging there. And so I asked him if he wanted me to go get them, and he said yes. So I went and got them. And as I'm going, I'm walking by, and in between each counter, I'm seeing 3 people here, 2 people here, another woman lying very still by herself in between another counter, and then there's a woman lying behind the counter. And as I walked by her, she didn't move. And I didn't know. I just knew that we needed to get her help, and I locked eyes with one of the Trader Joe's employees who was sitting with 2 other shoppers. And I was like, we have to get her help. So I walked back, and I said, there's a woman who's been shot. And he said, that's not my fault. That was the police. And I was like, okay, but she's going to need help. And he said, you're pushing, And so I said, okay. So then we put the jackets on him because he was shivering with the shock. And I had told him, you're in shock, that's why, So anyway, we put him, and then after we put the jackets on him, I said, Mike, who had already been helping him with things, and this other Trader Joe's employee over here, they could go pick up Millie, and they could take her outside and get her help. And he said, okay.
And so they did that.
And Mike went down, and then he went and, felt her pulse, and he looked back at me, and he said, And so they went and they picked her up and they carried her out. And then Mike came back in.
Mike came back in?
He did. And
did you talk to him about why he came back in?
Yeah, because the thing about Mike, he has a huge heart. And he just knew that he was there with us and didn't want to leave us. And this became really even more important later on when he had another opportunity to leave. It was, he felt like that we had become, we were working together. So it was Mike, and then there was a young Trader Joe's employee, and I were assisting Gene as he was figuring out what to do.
The phone rings, it's Sergeant Ruiz from the LAPD. What does he say, and how does that conversation go?
So I don't remember exactly how he started it, but he introduced himself, and then a conversation started between him and Gene, and basically Officer Ruiz was asking for him to let the hostages go, and he was asking, what do you have to offer me? And what Officer Ruiz came back with was the young woman who was in the car. He said she's getting treatment. And so, as we now know, it's his girlfriend. So he said, get me a phone call with her, and then I'll turn myself in. So that was pretty early on.
And she was being rushed to the hospital because we found out later she'd been grazed in the head with a bullet. She was involved in that automobile accident
Right.
when he crashed into the Trader Joe's. We also know that his grandmother, he had, according to
Shot.
police, shot his grandmother, led police on a pursuit. We've now seen video
Right.
of the pursuit in which police tell us that he was shooting at the officers. Gene Atkins was shooting at the officers. You didn't know any of that.
I didn't know any of that.
You just knew that this man had suddenly appeared in the store with a gun,
Right.
and you were all hostages.
Right.
Knowing what you know now about those things that happened and the video that's been released, do you have a feeling about if you had known these things, if you would have reacted differently toward Mr. Atkins?
So I'm glad that I didn't know, because I think I would have. The sense of the danger would have been heightened, knowing that he had the capacity to shoot at his grandmother earlier that day. What I was conscious of very early on was I was aware of how present I was, and that I wasn't really that afraid. Like in the first moments when I said when I was calling my daughter, and I didn't know, and I was aware of how exposed I was definitely terrified. Once I was actively working with him, and as long as we were able to keep things de-escalated, I felt like we were okay. There were things that happened then where the police were doing what they needed to do in a circumstance, trying to save as many people as they could, that amped things up hugely.
One of those things was the placement of, I guess, sharpshooters that he could see. Is that
Yes.
right?
So, and I was told by some of the other hostages that they could see them before Gene noticed them. And so at one point he looks, so we're sitting, I'm to his left, Mike is to his right, and he's sitting here, and then there's Trader Joe's employee standing in front of us. And he looked down, and across the parking lot on the roof was a sharpshooter, and I could see the gun pointed right at us. And so he starts yelling, "Get that guy off the roof." I start yelling into the phone, or I say, "You need to get the guy off the roof." And he's saying something about working with you, and Gene's like, "You're obviously not working with me, or else you wouldn't be putting somebody up on the roof, get him down." And so he's starting to yell, he's getting amped up. So I stood up and started yelling into the phone and yelling to the guy across the street, "Get off the roof, get off the roof." And obviously he can't listen to me.
Right.
But I just took everything that I had, full fierceness of my being, and just was like screaming, "Get off the roof." Because meanwhile, he's saying, if you don't get him off the roof, somebody's going to get hurt, and it's going to be your fault, just like it was with the other woman. And then he's starting to count down, 5, 4, 3, and I'm still yelling. I'm yelling at the guys. So then so the guy with the gun, he's pointing it towards us, and then it goes like 15 degrees to the left, but he's still there, and that's what is making the situation very dangerous. So then we see another guy coming up onto the roof. I see an arm first, and then a head, and Gene starts yelling, "Now there's another guy." And I said, no, wait a minute. He's getting him down. So he's gesturing for him to get off the roof. And so both of them then leave the roof, and we were all just terrified.
At this point, I'd like to ask you something that informs how you have this conversation with Mr. Atkins and with the officers happened to you in the weeks leading up to this event. You witness a
Right.
couple of motorcycle accidents,
Right.
and you tend to one of the victims who says to you what?
Right. So I'm talking to him, trying to help him keep calm and assure him that the ambulance is on its way. And I'm, just talking in low tones, but just talking to keep him grounded. And he said, he screamed at me, "Shut up, you're talking too much." Right. And so at the moment I was like, okay. But in the moment, early on, when Gene had said to me, you're pushing or you're going too fast, and I just had the recognition from that experience that, oh, I need to slow down, talk less, don't. So I just would say as much, and then I would be quiet. As much as I felt like was needed. I then, with the first officer on the phone, would say, slow down, let's take a moment, I'm gonna put you on mute for a second, let's stop, so that like Gene could catch up. Because as things were said more quickly, it would amp him up. And then there were a lot of circumstances throughout in terms of, like, I kept on trying to get him to let hostages go. So when they were brought over, there was a 15-year-old boy. I didn't know quite how old he was, but I said, this young man looks really scared. Can we let him go? And I think he said at that time, like he did a number of times, you're pushing, you're going too fast. I said, okay. But then like a minute or two later, he'd say, you can go. And then for the rest of the time, every single time he would allow for somebody to be let go, that would happen.
And during that 3-hour period, how many hostages were eventually let go?
Everybody was let go except for the 2 Trader Joe's employees who were working with us, Mike and myself, and the assailant.
And so it's down to you in the last few minutes of what has been a frightening 3 hours for you.
Yeah.
And how does it end?
So you had asked about the negotiations.
Mm-hmm.
And so once he said, if you get me a phone call with my girlfriend, I'll turn myself in. And then he said, I want you to get me handcuffs. I want to be handcuffed, turn my gun over, and I want to turn myself in. And then he hung up, and then he said, figure it out. And so we made a plan. I said that I would put the handcuffs on him, and then I would take his gun, and I opened up a Trader Joe's bag, and I would put it inside the bag. And I told the negotiator, I'm a person of integrity. You need to know that I'm going to tell you exactly what's happening. And in fact, I could take a picture with my phone of the gun in the bag and of the handcuffs on, so that you know.
When you walk out and you all come out as a group.
There's helicopters overhead. As we walk up the street, there's hundreds of police cars. 50, maybe 100, something like that. It was overwhelming. But they pulled me over to one side, and then everybody else was going to the other side, and I was like, I want to be with my people. It's like I didn't want to be separated yet. And so I went and I gave them hugs and told them how amazing they were. The young Trader Joe's employees, one of them was 19, the other one not much older than that. And they were amazing and courageous, and they didn't shut down. They were clearly afraid, and yet they did what they needed to do.
You were there at a moment that really helped. You were there, the person with trauma therapy training, who'd been through 12-step all of her life, who'd worked with other people who'd been through very difficult situations.
Yeah.
You had been there with the motorcyclist who had gone down, one who had told you to shut up so that he could collect himself. All those things came together in a moment that helped to diffuse what could have been an even worse situation.
Right.
Do you think about that?
I do. I do a lot, actually. The experience has been very complex since the incident. There's definitely trauma that I am getting help working through. But it also has been incredibly affirming and empowering, because everything that I believe in kind of, like you said, came to a point that day. And it leads to things that I feel like is really important for us, like as a society, who we are right now. There's, in our country, in the world, there's incredible division, and it's all fear-based, you know, and
we don't listen to each other.
we don't. And there's certain things that allow us to be able to, like, people aren't born a Mother Teresa, right? The things that I was able to do that day, even a year and a half ago, I could imagine not being able to do quite as well. So that, but it's the emotional intelligence. You know, we need to be teaching our kids that, more important than math, right? How to be a whole human being and understand ourselves and understand our feelings. You know, so no matter what it is that happens, if we take a look at who we are each day and what we need to be better human beings, and who we can be for those in our lives, that's where that's the good stuff.
MaryLinda, this has been just a tremendous conversation, and you are an amazing person. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My thanks to MaryLinda Moss for sharing a very personal story. She tells me there is a private support group for anyone who was directly affected by what happened in that Trader Joe's this past summer. If you'd like more information on that, go to my podcast page. It's ktla.com/Frank Buckley Interviews. You can also find our uncut audio conversation there on the Frank Buckley Interviews podcast. It's available wherever you listen to podcasts, including Google Play and iTunes, and on the KTLA 5 News app. If you'd like to comment on today's program or comment on any of our more than 110 interviews in our archives, tag me on social media at Frank Buckley TV on Twitter and on Instagram, or drop me a line on the Frank Buckley Facebook page. If you want to share this TV show with anyone, we post the show to YouTube on Mondays. Just search for Frank Buckley Interviews. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.